When the letter arrived, I was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment above a liquor store in downtown Pittsburgh. It was the sort of place where the pipes moaned the walls and the windows never quite sealed shut. I wasn't expecting anything. No birthday, no bills due. So the aged envelope, yellowing and wax sealed, stood out like a sore thumb among the grocery ads and fast food coupons. My name, Michael A. Lane, was written in perfect cursive, and the return address simply said, Withers End Estate, Merriwick, me. I didn't know anyone in Maine. Inside was a letter typed on a typewriter, formal and brief. A distant relative, Alaric Lane, had died and left me his property. I was his last living descendant, it claimed. The letter was signed by a law firm I'd never heard of, and it included a deed to a property called Withers End. I almost tossed it in the trash, thinking it was some scam. But curiosity, that old demon, got the better of me. I Googled Merriwick. It was a tiny coastal town, population under 300, barely a pinprick on the map. No website, just a few photos on outdated travel blogs, gray skies, rough waters, and one wide shot of crumbling Victorian house on a bluff, overlooking the Atlantic. Something about that house stirred something in me. A memory? A dream? I couldn't say. 2 weeks later, I was on a Greyhound bus with a duffel bag and a copy of the deed. I told myself I'd check it out, maybe flip it, and be back before winter. But I never came back. Merriwick greeted me like an exhale from a crypt. The bus dropped me off at the only gas station for 20 miles, where a weather-beaten sign read, Welcome to Merriwick, where the sea sleeps. A man named Eli, hired by the law firm, was waiting with a battered pickup truck. He was thin in his 60s, with a crooked smile and nicotine-stained fingers. You must be Lane's kin, he said. Alaric didn't talk about family much. Hell, didn't talk to anyone much. The ride to the estate was silent, except for the gravel crunching beneath the tires and the wind rustling through the birch trees that lined the narrow road. The fog was thick, unnaturally so, and the smell of salt and rot clung to the air. And then we saw it. The house loomed at the edge of a cliff like it had been grown there. Twisted iron fences, ivy-choked walls, and shuttered windows like black, watchful eyes. A tower jutted from one side, its peak lost in the mist. The wood was gray with age, the roof sagging in places. Still it stood tall, defiant. She don't look like much, Eli muttered, but she's been here longer than any of us. Inside it smelled of dust, mildew, and something else. Something faintly sweet like decaying flowers. The foyer was enormous, with a grand staircase that split left and right, a chandelier crusted in cobwebs, and portraits along the walls. Faded faces with eyes that seemed to follow me. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Eli handed me a key, an old iron thing with barbs along the stem. Good luck, he said. You'll need it. Then he left. The door shut behind him with a sound like a coffin closing. And I was alone. The silence inside Withers End was oppressive. Every creak of the old wood, every moan of the wind through the eaves, felt like a whisper from something just out of sight. I carried my duffel into the main hall and looked around. Dust cloaked everything. Furniture, shelves, the curling corners of rugs, like it had been untouched for decades. A grand piano sat in one corner beneath a tarp, and a strange, musty draft drifted down the staircase. I chose the first bedroom I found on the second floor. It had a view of the ocean, though the salt-streaked window made it hazy. The bed was made, oddly enough, though the blankets were thin and smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender. I was too tired to question it. I didn't sleep well. Sometime past midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the floorboards in the hall. I sat up, heart hammering. The house was supposed to be empty. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old places did that, didn't they? But then something scraped against the door. Not hard, just a gentle scratch, like nails. I didn't open it. I waited, holding my breath, until the sound stopped. I listened for hours after that. But nothing came again. In the morning, the house was still. Sunlight filtered through the salt-crusted windows, casting pale. Cold rays over everything. I wandered the house in daylight, searching for signs of what I might have heard. Nothing. Just empty rooms, locked doors, and shadows that lingered too long. In the library, I found the first real piece of mystery. It was hidden behind a false panel in the back of a shelf. A small, leather-bound diary, brittle with age. The front read, A. Lane, 1901. Inside, the ink had brown, but the writing was elegant and careful. Alaric's entries weren't about money or travel. They were confessions, nightmares, warnings. The house speaks. In dreams and in whispers behind the walls. There are things here, not ghosts, older, bound to us by blood and silence. I fear I am not the first Lane to be swallowed by this place, and I fear I will not be the last. There were pages torn out, entire years missing, but what remained chilled me. Mentions of dreams bleeding into reality, of voices in the walls, of eyes behind mirrors. The sea is not the only thing that sleeps here. I closed the book and looked around. The library suddenly felt colder, and I wasn't sure I was alone. Later that day, I explored the west wing, a part of the house I hadn't entered yet. Most of the doors were warped shut or open to rooms of rotting furniture and moth-eaten curtains. But one stood out, a black door with a rusted handle, and a strange sigil etched into the wood. It was locked. I tried the iron key Eli had given me. It didn't fit. Something about the door unnerved me. The air around it felt wrong, thicker, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I leaned close, and for just a moment, I thought I heard breathing. I backed away quickly. That night, I dreamed of drowning. The ocean pulled me under, cold and endless, and I sank into darkness. But beneath the waves, something moved, something vast and coiled, and it watched me. I woke gasping, salt in my mouth. The next morning, while exploring the tower, I found what looked like a gallery. The spiral stairs led to a circular room with high, arch windows and walls lined with portraits. They were all members of the Lane family. Stern-faced men, pale women with haunted eyes, children who never smiled. Each frame was labeled in gold leaf, and then I saw it. My portrait. It was unmistakably me. Same face, same dark eyes, only older, worn, as if painted years after the moment I was living now. There was no dust on the frame, just a nameplate, Michael A. Lane, 2025. No death date. As I stared, the light shifted. I could have sworn the eyes in the painting moved, and somewhere in the walls below, something laughed. I started hearing whispers, not just at night, but in daylight too. In the hall just beyond the staircase, I heard them most clearly, a murmuring like voices speaking through water. I couldn't make out words, only the tone, urgent, beckoning. I stood in the hall for almost an hour, listening. That's when the photographs began changing. In the gallery, in the sitting room, even in the guest bedroom. Portraits I hadn't noticed before now had subtle shifts. A hand in a different position. A face turned slightly more toward the viewer. In one, I saw a pale figure standing in the background that hadn't been there the day before. Each time I blinked, I wondered what else might have shifted. The whispers led me to the cellar. I hadn't dared go down before, but something pulled me, a compulsion, like gravity for soul. I found the cellar door in the pantry, behind a heavy wooden cabinet that had clearly been dragged aside before recently. The air grew colder as I descended. The stone steps were damp, and the walls dripped with condensation. I had a flashlight, but the beam seemed to stretch only a few feet ahead. Then, at the bottom, I found a second door, iron, bolted, with another sigil carved into it, this one matching the door upstairs. I put my hand on it. It felt warm, and then, behind the door, I heard it, my name, whispered like a prayer, or a curse. Michael. The door in the cellar stayed in my mind like a splinter. I didn't open it. Not yet. I told myself I needed to understand more before I crossed that line, before I acknowledged what I already knew deep down. Something in this house knew me. The next day, I found a narrow servant's stairwell hidden behind the library fireplace. It spiraled up steeply, the walls tight and crumbling with mold. At the top, it opened into a wing I hadn't seen on any of the floor plans. Smaller rooms, low ceilings, and old furniture covered in white sheets like shrouds. At the end of the hall was a room with no door, just a velvet curtain, frayed and moth-eaten. I pushed it aside. The room beyond was filled with mirrors, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them, no two the same. Antique dressing mirrors, fractured hand mirrors, tarnished silverback glass hung at odd angles. Some reflected the room clearly, others distorted, twisted, like carnival funhouse pieces warped by time and damp. I stood at the center. My reflection stared back at me from every direction, but not all of them moved when I did. One lingered. It was me, but not. Older, paler, and he was smiling. I turned to face it directly, but the mirror now held only my usual reflection, eyes wide, breath fogging the glass. Then the whispers began again, this time inside the room. They didn't come from behind the mirrors, but from inside them. I backed toward the curtain, heart thundering. Just before I fled, I caught a glimpse. One mirror, high in a corner, showed the room behind me. There was someone standing there. Someone I couldn't see when I turned. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The voice from behind the cellar door haunted every corner of my mind. Not just the fact that it had spoken, but that it had known my name. I kept the flashlight beside me in bed, fingers tight around its grip. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind outside the broken windows felt loaded with meaning. By 3 a.m, I gave up and went downstairs. My legs moved on instinct, like some part of me had already decided what to do. I remembered something Alaric had written in his diary. They cannot cross a line of salt, not unless it is broken or invited. From the kitchen, I took a tin of sea salt I'd seen in the cupboard. The metal rusted, but still half full. I poured a line in front of the cellar door, slow and steady, heart pounding with every grain that spilled. Then I did the same on the threshold to my bedroom, across every window sill, and a full circle around the iron key on the foyer table. I felt safer. Not safe, just buffered. At dawn, I finally collapsed on the bed, the cold barely touching me. Sleep came in snatches, like breathing through water. My dreams were red and wet and full of rusted hinges. I saw Alaric there, standing behind the iron door, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut with wire. He shook his head. He begged me. Then I woke to the sound of shattering glass. I bolted upright. The salt line at the foot of my bed was broken, scattered, as if something had stepped over it. And glass? A mirror, small, framed, once hanging across the room, was smashed across the floor. Only one shard was left whole, and in it, just for a heartbeat, I saw a pale hand pulling itself under the bed. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Not until the sun was high enough to burn away the shadow of that thing beneath me. That's when I knew. The house didn't just remember me. It had been waiting. The next day, I tried to open the cellar door again. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, screamed, but the name no longer came. Instead, the door in the west wing, the one with the sigil, stood ajar. I could have sworn I hadn't touched it. Inside was a room unlike any other in the house. It was circular, painted a deep red that looked too dark to be mere paint. Symbols adorned the walls, carved deep into the wood, and at the center sat a chair. Not just a chair, a throne. Old, bone white. I took a step inside, and the temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged. Shadows pulled in the corners, pulling away from the light. And there, on the wall opposite the throne, was another portrait. Me again. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Something stood behind me in the painting. Tall, shapeless, eyes like coals. And in the space where my death date should have been, the numbers burned themselves into the canvas. 2026.